So the outline of what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to go through my story, the whole how I got into apps, where I'm at now, the process of app development, and also pretty much the entrepreneurial process. So this could apply to just about any other product, with steps and key points in each one. And then I'm going to go through the life of an entrepreneur, what to expect when you actually get going. Then advice and mistakes to avoid, then recommended reading, and then finally questions. So my story is, I started off as a freshman in Keith Wright's class. Just a lot of ambition. I really wanted to create something that not a lot of other students were into at the time. As ICE developed more and more, starting to get into it. But I was just kind of wanted to make an app. I had no experience, no money, no know-how whatsoever, but it's just something I really wanted to do. So I self-taught myself everything. It took way too long to develop. Development process is probably 3.5 times as long as it should have taken, but I got out in the App Store. And it was this one, Fish Feast 3D. It was a game I made pretty much out of my dorm room with a former high school baseball coach of mine. He's a serial entrepreneur and he funded half of it, and we just got it going, and it actually did pretty well. So then I started realizing this is my passion, this is what I want to do, and I got into TribuNote. So my sophomore year, it was an actual startup. We raised seed round, later venture capital, and I was scaling the startup while going to school full time, which was pretty tough. And then TribuNote got so big that I just had to kind of take a back seat and say I can't do both at the same time. So I basically got rid of my stock, told them I couldn't do it anymore, and pretty much backed out of it, it was hard, but I couldn't do school and TribuNote at the same time. And then I started getting into working on contract, so I didn't have time to work for stock or equity just because it was so hard to please investors and whatnot. So I started working on contract, and I led marketing for Arai, which is in the upper left, and it's an AI app, and also designed the first product. And then I worked on a medical device at Stanford, which was, I'll get into later, but not the best experience. And then on the upper right, I created a web app called Apply, where it's basically a nonprofit where I help other students create apps, help walk them through the process, offering feedback, solving problems they have, and it's just been great so far. So yeah, then I started getting a lot of recognition, thought this is really what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and felt kind of reassured. Parents thought it was a distraction at first, might happen with you. They say just focus on school, but it kind of shut them up after I was in all these magazines and newspapers. So that's pretty much my story. I don't want to spend too long on it just because I have so much to cover. But this is more or less the process of creating an app. And the first two are very interchangeable, but 4 through 8, I would say, are the most imperative part, and I think you should do it very linearly. But the top 3, ideation, problem recognition, I'll run through each one later. The first form of testing through primary and secondary research, and forming the business and also forming your team are interchangeable. You can pretty much do that in any order, but once you get down to testing, evaluating, testing again, evaluating, and then testing again, each form of testing is different and has its own unique sort of composition that I think you should really keep this in its order. And then launching marketing, and then continuing to iterate and scale. That's kind of interchangeable, but it tends to just be at the end, just because as soon as you launch, you want to market it as much as possible because you finally have the time to. So first step is ideation and problem recognition. Where exactly do ideas come from? How do you solve a problem, etc. And there's different ways of coming up with an idea. The most, I would say, prevalent is solving a personal problem, as Mrs. Bigfair could attest. If you solve a problem for yourself and it works for you, chances are it's going to work for someone else. But that doesn't mean that you can't observe other people and solve their problems, or just come up with a random idea that you think might work. And then also, the third, and is actually my favorite, is this, therefore that. And that means you're taking an existing platform or existing structure, technology, etc., and trying to foresee where you can take it and where exactly you can go with it. So for example, Instagram, the iPhone had a camera, and you could also create a social media app, so they just combine the two. So iPhone, camera, therefore Instagram. Another interesting thing that I just read about is out in San Francisco, they're actually treating people with PTSD coming back from Iraq with augmented reality. So how you treat PTSD is you expose people to the fear, and the best way to do that is to actually create a world around them through augmented reality, and they automatically get exposed to it, and they're making huge breakthroughs in treating and curing PTSD for Iraqi veterans. So they see augmented reality and virtual reality, and they say, what can we do with this? And it's solving a big problem. So at the end of each step, I'm going to have key points, and the key point for the ideation is understanding what a good idea is. So you might hear ideas all the time. I go to pitches and startup meets all the time, and everyone's like, that's a good idea, that's a great idea. But a good idea, when it comes down to it, is really something that solves a significant problem. Solving a minor problem or a problem that isn't worth paying for, you're not going to do that well, and it's not going to be able to scale that quickly or that effectively. And better than existing competition, you have to be able to prove to the market that you're better than what exists. And it's just the nature of capitalism, and it's something that you really have to understand your competition, and it's called environmental scanning, where you go out and see exactly where your competition is solving a problem, what they're charging, their business model, et cetera. And you have to be able to make a good estimate as to how much better are you doing it than your competition. And lastly, the potential for a sustainable business model. Now, an app or a company that doesn't make money isn't an app or a company, it's a hobby. So you want to be able to understand if your app idea could possibly make money. It doesn't have to have a business model right away. Like YouTube didn't have a business model until probably 2 or 3 years into it, but it had a great potential because it had a lot of users and a lot of people on the platform. And then also, you'll probably hear this a lot if you're in the business school, that people will pay for benefits, not features. So I've seen tons of apps with just all these bells and whistles and features that really aren't benefits. They're kind of cool to have, they're cool technology, but they don't solve a specific problem, and they're not a benefit for customers. And also worked in quizzes. Has anyone heard of Bill Gross before? He started Idea Lab, and you guys have. And Idea Lab he basically incubated 100 companies when he did this study, and he wanted to determine what exactly was a key predictor of success or failure for a company in the startup stage. And he analyzed 100 companies and found that one of these 5 was the most important. Does anyone have like a guess or an opinion what they think the most important thing is that's going to determine success? Or yeah.
Quality of team.
No.
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 Timing.
Yeah. Which is like mind blowing. I would have thought it would be a combination of quality of team, like you said, and amount of funding. But he looked back, and ideas that had been passed over by investors, ideas that weren't seen as anything, but were perfectly timed, like Airbnb during the housing crisis, were more likely to be successful than a company with tons of funding, a great business model. Like I said, YouTube didn't even have a business model. Quality of team, and then the idea itself. So I would also do an environmental scanning if you're trying to create an app. What exactly does the market look like right now? What problems not being addressed? What new innovation or technology has been introduced that could create a great timing for your app? All right, and then once you have an idea, I think this is the most important step out of all of them, because it could save you a lot of money, a lot of time later down the road, and it proves that your idea is actually worth something. It can't absolutely prove, but it gives a good idea. So there's 2 types of research that you should look into: primary and secondary. If you learn this in the business school, primary is what you gather yourself, that you go out and gather, and secondary is what already exists. Primary is mainly through surveys, observations, postal surveys, telephone interviews, online surveys, etc. And the best platform to use for collecting primary data is what's called Qualtrics. And Villanova has a partnership. So we have a consumer insights lab that if you create a survey or some sort of data collection method, they'll send it out to hundreds of people, and you'll get replies back in probably 2 or 3 days. It's unbelievable. And then secondary research, government agencies, trade associations, consumer reports, articles. I wouldn't go looking for these. I would just honestly Google what exactly you're looking for, and these things will naturally pop up. There is a trade-off. Can anyone give me an idea of what you think the trade-off is between primary and secondary research? Like, why is one better than the other versus the weaknesses of the two? Yeah. Okay.
Primary research can be time-consuming and expensive because you're doing it yourself,
Yeah.
but you can have a better, more tailored answer to what you're doing. And secondary research already exists, but it might not be perfect for what you're doing, or you might have to pay for it.
Perfect. Yeah. So startups love secondary research because it's cheap and it's fast, but primary research really delves into the problem and understanding the customers, but it takes more time and it tends to be expensive. So you want to look into the two. What's your budget, and what exactly do you want to get out of the interviews or the surveys or any sort of research method? Key point with this is don't ask your mom if your idea is good. A lot of entrepreneurs do this. They'll ask family members, best friends. Don't ask any family members or anyone that might be biased towards your opinion. I asked my mom what my idea was good once. She's like, yeah, you're perfect, just whatever. Like, pat me on the head, like, it'll work out. Terrible idea. Didn't end up doing it, but I should have done it. And then there's also possible ways to skew primary data that you should watch out for. Leading questions. We all know what leading questions are. Confusing questions. Survey fatigue. If you're going to create a survey, I wouldn't create a survey longer than 10 minutes. A lot of marketing websites say 20, but those people are very paid or highly paid, and it takes a lot of time. I would keep it between 3 and 5 minutes, just because if it's above that, towards the end, people will get tired. They won't be able to think as deeply, and they're not as sharp, and they're just bored of your survey. So 3 to 5 minutes, I think, is a sweet spot. Double barrel questions. That means you're testing two things at the same time. So, for example, does water and beer healthy and fun, or something like that? Like you have two different adjectives for two different nouns. You don't want to do that. You want to test one thing at one time, and that'll skew the data if you have more than one. Vague questions. If people are having trouble with it, it's not a good idea. You want to be very crystal clear about what you're asking. Arcane vocab. Arcane kind of sounds like archaic, but it means esoteric. So if you answer, like, if you ask GRE type vocab, SAT type vocab, you're going to skew the data because not everyone has that type of vocab, especially if they speak multiple languages. So make it as simple as possible. And then secondary data, unreliable sources, biased sources, and outdated sources. I wouldn't turn to anything that could potentially be biased or unreliable, especially like media outlets like Fox, MSNBC, like any sort of bias that could exist there, I wouldn't look to. I would look to very objective data sources like consumer reports, market analytics journals, things like that. And then 2014 and on is usually the sweet spot of what I look for because the market's really changing very quickly. And if the market isn't changing that quickly and there isn't much evolution before 2014 is fine, I'll just be careful and understand your market before you dig in before 2014. So the QR card, you don't have to do it now, but I gave an example of what a survey should look like a real life example. If you have the QR code app on your phone, you can take a picture of it and you'll be able to access it like right away. Do it later, it doesn't matter, but if you are going to do it, it's a real project I'm testing, so don't just do like BS answers, like actually answer it if you could. So yeah. So now after you tested the idea, which I think is the most important, forming the business and the different taxation structures and legal structures, you can really mess up here, and a lot of people try to do the whole lawyer thing themselves. I wouldn't recommend doing that, even though it's more expensive to go to a lawyer. The possibility of you messing up somewhere along the taxation code or any sort of regulatory code is very likely, especially because law firms will actually write off a lot of your expenses at the beginning because they know startups don't have as much money as existing startups. So one app I started, they wrote off literally everything. So I literally started a company with no money other than what went into development. But you also have to decide for yourself, do you want it to be a project, like just something you want to work on, collect revenue from, or do you want to actually start a company? If it's a project, you can do it by yourself, or you can outsource. I'll get into that a little bit later. But there's also a few trade-offs that you should be aware of. A personal account, for example, if you see on the App Store, if we were to say Brady Acton under the name of the app, that is a personal account on Apple as well as a sole proprietorship, usually with the state. And that includes unlimited liability, which means that anyone can sue you and come after your personal assets if you were to be sued. Not a lot of apps are sued. It's pretty unlikely because not many people patent apps, but I didn't really want to be an 18, 19-year-old kid getting sued by some random app developer. So I went with a company and chose a law firm. And the structure I would recommend is a C corporation in the state of Delaware. Delaware has the most preferable tax structure, and then also investors will pretty much only invest in C corps because LLCs, it's very difficult to issue stock, and it's just a huge time-consuming process for investors and for lawyers. So they like C Corp in the state of Delaware. If you don't plan to raise money, it's possible to go with an LLC. That was what my first app was. And you're taxed, if it's just one person, you're taxed as sole proprietorship, which is less tax than you would be if you were a C Corp. If it's a partnership, you're taxed as a partnership, which is still less. But if you want to be a startup and eventually raise money, C Corp in the state of Delaware is the best way to go. Next, if you are a company, investors want to see co-founders. I'm going to get into the team a little bit later. It's probably the most tricky and most difficult part of starting an app is forming a team and working with a team. But it's a necessary evil. And the way you get over that evil part, I think, is vesting in options. So vesting means they can't collect all their stock in the company right away. They have to work for the company for a certain amount of months or years before they get a percent of stock. So typically, there will be a cliff period where they get half their stock. That's usually after a year. You usually get half, and then invest for 3 or 4 years, and they get in 1/4 increments the remaining 50%. So that just makes sure that they won't start the company and then just run away. They're actually invested, etc. And then options is probably the best incentive for creating more employees. So Google, Facebook, Amazon, they had their core co-founders, which they had split up 100%. And then they gave about, I would say, 10 to 15% in the form of options, which means when a company is growing, they don't have a lot of cash, so they'll give people options, which basically means that the person can exercise those options, like buy them at a certain price at whatever time they want, hoping that the price will go up. So if the stock price is $50 per share, and they were given options 2 months ago at $10 per share, they can buy it at $10 per share, even though it's worth 50. So they quintuple their investment in the company. And then, like I said, accounting and tax is more complex. I wouldn't do it yourself. It's really tough unless you're a tax accountant. I mean, my tax accounting teachers don't even do their own taxes just because personal taxes is very complicated and business taxes is even more complicated. So I'll probably hire a tax accountant. Reach out through Villanova. There's a ton of them, and I'm sure they'll give you a good price for it. And then you want to have a pitch deck, and you got to focus on investor management. A pitch deck is basically how you convey over paper your idea or your company to any sort of external audience. You might hear that you have to write a business plan, whatever. No app companies write business plans. That might make a one-page fact sheet, but it really all comes down to pitch deck. Like investors, VCs, they only read pitch decks. They don't read 30-page business plans because they just don't have time. And a pitch deck is usually 10 to 15 slides. Get more into it later. And then you have to have a business model canvas. So the business model canvas is basically everything. It's your company roadmap that will most likely change, but it shows direction for your company and also relays that information, that direction to your co-founders, anyone working for you, your investors, etc. And this is what it looks like. So it's literally your entire company. A company at its core is an entity that makes money, and this is pretty much a plan to make money. So up here, you list your value propositions. What kind of value are you creating for the consumer? Who exactly are your customers? Where are they? What are their age, demographics, psychographics, behavior? How can you segment them in the pie? The relationships you have. Like how do you reach customers through your marketing channels? How do you reach customers through your product? For example, App Store, revenue streams. How do you make money from your customers? Cost structure. How much are you charging customers? And then just goes into the key partners, key activities, key resources. This is all the back-end stuff that makes your product and value delivery run, and it's just as vital as everything, but it's considered the back end because I think the most important thing is value proposition and customer. So at the end of the day, if you're not providing enough value, you don't really have a business, you have a hobby. So a lot of people want to know how to monetize your app. There's a lot of trade-offs that are involved. So if you start off just charging a face value, say 99 cents in the App Store, basic economics tells you you're going to get less downloads than if it were free. So the new up-and-coming monetization strategy for apps is accumulating as many users as possible through free apps, making them sign up within the app so you keep their data. You can actually sell their data to third-party vendors. Most of the time, they don't really know you're doing that. It's a lot of ethics boards aren't really happy with it, but how these companies make millions and millions of dollars is they charge for free, get as many users, get their information, try to keep them in the app as often as possible through notifications. Like the reason every app wants you to have notifications is because when you come back, they make more money through advertising. So the more times you see it, more advertisements you see, the more money the app is making. And the different advertisement platforms are iAd, AdMob, and those are really the two main ones. My biggest recommendation for monetization is if you have a app for an Android, use the Google platform, because I once had an iOS app and I was using AdMob, which is a Google platform, and they didn't want to solve any problems. iOS didn't want to solve any problems when I called them about my app, because that's who I had the relationship with a Google product. They didn't really care. So if you're going to create an Android app, use AdMob, and if you create an iPhone app, use iOS, because it's just a customer relationship nightmare with the company. And then if you have great tech, but you're not really turning a profit, it's not really working out for you, you can also license the technology, any back-end algorithms you have. It kind of defeats your competitive edge because literally everyone's copying you. But if you're about to go defunct, licensing isn't the worst thing. All right, now this is my favorite and least favorite part. The most difficult part of making an app, of being an entrepreneur, is your team. I don't care what anyone says. It's not the MVP, it's not scaling your company, it's dealing with people, because there's oftentimes no right or wrong, there's no roadmap, no blueprint. It's just, you have to deal with a lot of different issues with people. So I broke it down into what's worked for me, and I think the best way to go about it. And number one, less is more. Everyone thinks you need all these co-founders. One person does design, one person does back-end, one person does marketing, another person is a CEO. That's the worst thing you can do, because the more people you manage, the more likely there's going to be a problem between one co-founder or all co-founders. And the main reason why companies fail is because the co-founders split up. 62% of the time during a failure, it's because the co-founders split up. I've heard nightmare stories of lawyers getting calls from co-founders saying, I just punched my co-founder, what should I do? Am I going to get in trouble? It's tough, but less is more. I would recommend 2 to 3 co-founders, and then if you're missing anything, outsource. There's a bunch of companies called like Fiverr or freelancer.com where you can actually outsource. So just keep it as minimal as possible, and when you're actually creating the team, there's certain red flags that you want to avoid. And the most important red flag to avoid, I think, is other perfectionists. And those are the people that have unrealistic expectations of other co-founders. That'll say, I worked 20 hours today, you only worked 14, I'm 6 ahead of you. What the hell's your problem? Like, I've seen that all the time, and that's the worst thing. You want to expect a lot out of your co-founder, but I think that comes at the beginning when you start to establish trust and choose the person based off understanding what exactly he or she wants out of it, and trying to understand, will they work hard, etc. During the process, it's the worst thing you can do. Then under that, look for EQ, not IQ. There's a famous book called Emotional Intelligence, written about 3 or 4 years ago, I believe, that said the greatest determinant of success is emotional intelligence and not IQ, intelligence quotient. So don't look for PhDs from Harvard and whatever and think that they're just the next great Mark Zuckerberg, next great entrepreneur. You want hustlers, you want people that will wake up and work nonstop. They love the grind, they love the process. They're good at working with people, they can manage their emotions, they're not going to get too emotional, too angry, because entrepreneurship is really tough. It's a battle every day. And if you have someone that's very emotional, it's just going to drain the entire team. And then, like I said, vest stock and add milestones. So what I like to do is say, I'll give you 5% of the company if you come and join me. If you help me raise money, or if you build the next product, I'll bump you up to 7.5%, and all that stock invests so they don't get it right away. Set communication guidelines. So the most important part in a team dynamic is having great communication. So if you tell your co-founders that at the onset, if there's something wrong, tell me right away. Don't hold it in. Don't let it fester and manifest and whatever. Just get it out there. Tell me what the problem is so I can solve it. The worst types of people are the ones that just hold everything in and wait for something wrong to happen and they just explode. I've seen it all the time. So make sure you have communication guidelines that if something goes wrong, you tell me right away, or you tell the team or whatever. Just get it out there. And part of this is sorting out the equity and compensation before you do the project. One project I did, I got all the way into it with 3 or 4 teammates, and we hadn't set out what kind of equity we'll be getting in the company, who's the CEO, etc. And the company ended up disbanding because someone wanted this role and someone wanted this role, and the other person wanted this amount of equity. Set it out before you start the project. It's very vital. And then just some soft skills I think you should have in forming a company and working with a team are empathy and camaraderie, having a common goal. So understand people's goals before they get into a project. Especially in college, people have different goals. Some want to buff the resume, some people want to make a lot of money, some people want to eventually drop out. Make sure you have a common goal, because if people have different goals, you're going to split up eventually. It's inevitable, it will happen. So ask people what they want out of it right away. And also have empathy when you're in the process, try to understand where they're coming from. If they're being unreasonable, tell them to take a break, come back, and we'll talk about it later. And then have camaraderie, so don't be afraid to do something outside of work with your team. I don't know, go bowling, go to the bars, whatever. Just create a friendship and a mutual bond and understanding, and that'll help your work life as well. And then if you're going to be a leader, if you're leading the project, stick to the U.S. Marine Corps principles, and that is lead from the front, coach people, offer a sort of being of resilience and optimism and having a lot of energy, and then people will feed off of that are underneath you. And also don't make people do something that you wouldn't want to do yourself. And I see this all the time. If you don't want to do it, don't make someone else do it. If you don't feel like taking out the trash, don't make someone else do it. Just do it yourself. It's not that hard, because if you do that, the bond starts breaking, and it's really hard to reseal the bond after you start losing trust and patience with each other. And then keep certain things to yourself. Politics, religion, personal life, no one has to talk about that at work. I worked with someone, I'm not going to say who, but one of us was a Trump supporter, the other person was a Bernie supporter, and it created a divide. We got really angry with each other and got into a few debates. So just don't talk about it. There's no reason to. Case study. So these are 2 people I've worked with. Word of advice, be a good teammate or else it'll probably haunt you for a really long time. This guy on the right is I worked with at Stanford. Like I said, the medical device project was a nightmare, 100% because of him. Second on the right is this guy with a rye that I've been working with, and he's the best teammate ever. Person 1, I'm not going to say his name, but emotionally erratic. As soon as something would go wrong, just start crying, like literally break down. It got to the point where I was just sending him like emojis of like little girls crying on Facebook Messenger, and he would show it to people, and it was, I don't know. And then he was also a judge and a lawyer, so whenever someone would make a mistake, he would be a judge about it. Whenever he would make a mistake, he would just be a lawyer. Like he would just like try to defend himself, like screw you, like whatever. And then he was also a micromanager, has to be number 1, no empathy. He's either a CEO or not a part of the project, and everything you're doing, he's over your shoulder looking at you. That's the worst way to show trust and empathy in a team. That's even worse than the first 2. And he would yell at teammates and make you feel inferior. So this medical device, I invented, this was my project. This is him doing it at NYU, completely stole it, sent him a cease and desist, gave him the middle finger, but long story. He's gone through about 7 to 9 teammates on one project, at least. I would say even 14 or 15. And he's just, it's mainly because he'll yell at people and make them feel inferior. He has to be number 1. On the flip side, this guy's a man. I mean, if he isn't Mark Zuckerberg in 10 years, I would be surprised, because he's all about the team, he's all about empathy, he works with people, he coaches them, helps them through whatever difficulties they're having, and he'll go out of their way, work an extra 3 or 4 hours just to solve a problem for someone else, not even his own problem. He's willing to lend responsibility, say, I trust you with this project, go out and do it, and it shows a lot of humility in the process. And he's always happy, grateful, optimistic. I've never seen a picture of him where he's not smiling, or even in person. He's just the happiest person ever. And he loves the entrepreneurial process. He loves creating apps and making a difference, and he just lives for it. So a few key points just to reiterate on the team. You'll see co-founders more than girlfriends, boyfriends, spouses, best friends, etc. choose wisely. You wouldn't choose your wife over, I don't know, a dating, maybe you will, I don't know. But I would work with a person first and really understand what kind of team dynamic you'll have and how you work together before going 100% in. Second, like I said, you wouldn't choose a spouse after reading his or her Facebook bio. Some people probably have or thought that they wanted to marry the person. So LinkedIn and resumes are very, very reductive and don't show the whole picture. They can't show emotional quotient. They can't show drive and enthusiasm. So how you combat that is first, I would work with them, give them a trial session, maybe work with them for 3 or 4 weeks, and then say, all right, we'll give it a go. You can be my co-founder, and then go from there. And then no partner is better than a bad partner. Like I said, everyone wants all these partners to do everything. But if you have a bad partner, one partner can sink the entire ship. Not just the team dynamic, but the whole company. So you really have to be careful. It's the most important thing. All right, so now when you're actually into the product, I'll get more into the technical aspects. When I went through the process, it seemed very linear, but it's really not. It's kind of cyclical. So the first product is called the minimum viable product, and it's the new product that has just the sufficient features, just the core features of the problem that you're trying to solve. It's really only for the earlier adopters, and it's just a barometer of, is my product meeting a certain need? How exactly are people using it? How should I monetize? And it's a test product, and it's what's known as the experiment in the lead startup. So the technical, once you are going into the MVP to actually design the MVP, first off, you start with sketches, and it can really be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in any sort of robust software. It can literally be by hand. But when you actually want to create the mock-ups that you're going to give to the developers, there's 2 alternatives, and within each alternative there's 2 or 3 options. So if you're aesthetically inclined or you have design experience, Sketch and Photoshop are the 2 best. I like Sketch better just because there's so many plugins that all these companies are, they pretty much have their own app store for Sketch. Photoshop a little bit, but Photoshop is more for editing photos and pictures of people. If you really want to get into app development, I think Sketch is the best one. But if you don't have a lot of design experience, you're not very inclined, Canva is a really good one as well. And they're basically pre-made designs and mock-ups that you can just edit. It makes it a lot easier. And this is a new product that I just found out about, but it's probably the best thing to ever happen to app development. And it's called Zeppelin, Z-E-P-L-I-N. And it's basically a bridge between your Sketch or your Photoshop with developers. So as soon as you put in a mockup, they can see your front-end developers. They can see exactly what to build, and it just streamlines the process and makes it a lot quicker instead of having to email all of them, upload them, and they have to download them. It just makes it very quick, and when you have to reiterate very quickly, Zeppelin makes it a lot quicker. So programming languages, I'm not going to get too much into it because I can't teach an entire programming language in even a semester, but just an introduction. The official iOS for apps programming language is called Swift. It's S-W-I-F-T, and you can still build apps with Objective-C, but Apple's trying to move away from it towards Swift just because there's more capabilities. And then Android, their official languages are Java and then C++. They're still probably going to stick with it. They're not moving away from that, I don't foresee. And when you're working with developers, there's just some vocab you have to know that I didn't know, and that's front versus back end. Front end is what's called client side, so it's everything that the person sees, it's user interface, how he or she interacts with the app. And then back end is server side, so it's everything that's running in the background. It could be anything from storing data to the app and transmitting it to the servers, or understanding your account info, analyzing your behavior within the app. Anything that can't be seen is server side. And then if you see something that says full stack engineer, that means it can do front end and back end. It's rare, but there are a lot of full stack engineers, and typically they're working at big tech companies like Google or Uber. Algorithms, not exactly programming, but it's something separate you have to learn, and it's how most of these apps are run, through algorithms. And then a little bit more about servers. It's incredibly easy to use servers. The reason you want to have a server is if you have a lot of data storage, if you want to store accounts. So if someone logs into Facebook, Facebook has servers that store all that data, and they're at the size where they have their own servers, but it's really expensive if you're just starting an app. It's best to outsource, and Amazon Cloud Services is probably the cheapest. You pay like $9.99 a month or something. I haven't seen the rates in a while, but you want to outsource it, it's really not that expensive. And then insourcing, it's more agile, meaning you can make adjustments a lot easier. When you outsource, you have a set product, and when you want to make certain adjustments or add features, you have to start paying again, and it ends up compiling a lot of money very quickly, and it's a lot cheaper to insource, and you can make it a lot quicker, any adjustments. So if you want to learn to code, these are the two best programs, Code Academy and Treehouse. If you're just starting to learn how to code, the best language I would say is HTML. It's the simplest, it's pretty much the basis for most other coding languages, and Code Academy, the first lesson they give you is in HTML, and then you go on to, I think, C++, etc. Once you get better at HTML, C++, Treehouse has these projects that you can work on, where you literally create an app inside the platform, and it walks you step by step how to do it, how to really create an app, and you can see that in the end product at the end. Then outsourcing, if you want to outsource, it depends on what your goals are. If you want to keep the team pretty small, if you don't want to spend a lot of money, outsourcing to cheap freelancers are, the best ones are Upwork, TopTal, and Freelancer. These are tough because most of the people are foreign, so I worked with Chinese developers, and they're 12 hours ahead, so I would be working with them from 10 p.m. to 2 in the morning sometimes, just because that was their work schedule. And just their mindset is a little bit different than these expensive agile teams below. They just want to, since they're charging not a lot of money, they want to have a lot of turnover, and they want to get your product done as quickly as possible. So the way to approach it isn't how you would approach a team dynamic. Having empathy usually doesn't work. Being hard on them is usually the best way to go. I physically made one cry once, and he loved emojis for some reason. Like it was just very unprofessional. But he would text me like a week later with a crying emoji saying "still crying." Like I was a little bit too hard on him, but he wasn't doing a good job. We were behind schedule, we were over budget, and he just wanted to get done with the project. So I would never do that to a co-founder or a teammate, but it had to be done. It ended up working out, and whatever. So expensive agile teams, if you want to spend lots of money, if you have a lot of money in the bank, these are the best developers. They put entire teams on your app. They can make any adjustments in real time whenever you want it, but they can get upwards, depending on the app, of $10,000 to $50,000. These guys usually work for per hour, $9, $10, $11 per hour, or by total project. So $1,200 for the whole project. It's not that expensive. Key point, because I'm still an MVP, your product isn't only a revenue machine, but it's also a sophisticated measuring machine. So think of your MVP more as a barometer versus a first product. You want to have as many measurements and analytics within and outside the app to track any sort of data or how the person is using the app. And you don't want to be annoying about it, but you want to have as much as possible. With the MVP, you might need to pivot. So all your hypotheses may be wrong. No one may like your app. It happens, but it's just something you have to do. There's a famous saying, pivot or persevere, in Silicon Valley, and it's not a bad thing if all your hypotheses are wrong. You just go on to the next thing and you pivot your product. So a pivot, like I said, is a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis of product, business model, or engine of growth. So it might not be your product that isn't working, it could be your business model or your way of marketing, so you might need to pivot. Quick quiz, name the famous, does everyone know what a unicorn is? Unicorn's $1 billion company. A decacorn, deca meaning 10, $10 million company like Uber, Facebook, Twitter. So I have like a little bit of a quiz. Name the famous unicorns that these companies turned into. Like these are the first versions. Does anyone know what this turned into? It's called Bourbon, location-based services. You can check in, whatever. Anyone have an idea?
Yo.
Guess?
Yeah.
Close. Actually, Well, not really.
Concierge?
Instagram.
Oh.
So yeah, the co-founder was a Google associate out of Stanford. He was a marketing manager, and he had all these features and found out that people really love the pictures aspect of it. So they pivoted into Instagram, and the rest is history. Next one, Odeo, find, play, enjoy. Yeah, I had no idea, but
Spotify? I don't know.
Twitter. But yeah. So it had all these categories. It was pretty much like a Google, but social network. It was like Google Plus. And this one I think is the most difficult. It's called Tote, where you can shop your favorite stores from your iPhone.
Groupon?
No. It's impossible. Pinterest. But yeah. They found that people love just looking at the dresses and the pictures, like they were getting all this buzz and people looking at the app, but no one was buying anything. So they created Pinterest. And now everyone shops from their iPhone. So they had the right idea, but going back to the timing, not the best timing. So yeah, that's Pinterest. All right, then once you have the MVP, you validated all your hypotheses, everything looks good, you want to go into your beta test. And this is the second version of your product. Still a barometer, still measuring, but it has more features, more functionality, less bugs. All the defects have been removed, and you just launch it out to X number of people. Not the entire mass market, but anywhere from 30 to 100, I think is good. And not your friends, not your mom, just consumers. And then try to understand if they like it or if they don't. If they're using it all the time, if they're coming back, if they're spending money on it, that means you have product market fit. You hear this a lot in Silicon Valley. Self-explanatory, it just means your product fits the market. As soon as you have a beta test, I'll get into the third ring later. But like I said, the beta test is still a test. If you find market fit, make sure to find as many bugs before growth hacking. That doesn't mean launching the final version without any bugs, just because of what Reid Hoffman said. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you will launch too late. It doesn't mean that if you have a lot of bugs, you shouldn't launch your final product. If you find market fit, still do it with a lot of bugs, but don't growth hack. Don't start marketing it out to the masses. Because you're just going to waste a lot of money. You're going to get a lot of bad consumer reviews. That's going to potentially kill your app. So now once you're in the green circle, you're really starting to look into getting it out to the consumer, getting it out to the people, and you're using what is called IMC, an integrated marketing campaign, where it's just basically a marketing campaign that's cohesive, that relays a uniform message. You're reaching your target customers. It's just very uniform. That's why it's called integrated. And then second, I think the most important form of marketing is the brand. Like, what is Angry Birds without the Angry Birds? Like, if you're just shooting squares at circles, like what fun is that? You really want to be able to create an interesting brand, interesting name, characters, etc. Unique color scheme. Try to stay away from the blue color scheme like Twitter and Facebook because you're not being unique. Everyone uses blue nowadays. People are starting to move into like more unique colors, hipster colors like dark red, pink, etc. And that's been working. Another key point is try to understand where your target market is, and that's where you should start in creating a marketing campaign. So everyone comes to me and says, how do I market this, whatever, and my first question is, where are your customers? How can you reach them? Where are their touch points? And if they're young millennials, it's usually on your phone, it's usually on other apps, so you want to look into a digital marketing campaign through programmatic advertising. So targeting them within those apps with advertisements. If they don't use apps, if they, I don't know, if they just don't prefer to use apps, then you have to find some other unique way through like guerrilla marketing, which I'll get into in a second, etc. So how you do that, every time you download an app, take note of how you found out about it. Then you'll really start to understand what are the marketing campaigns of these big companies. And if these big companies are marketing towards you, something is working. So take note from that. Yeah, so this is just a bigger view of the third circle. As soon as you have product market fit, then you want to target your customers, like I said before, and then find growth channels. And all that means is different marketing vehicles. It could be anything from guerrilla marketing, programmatic advertising, partnerships, etc. and also understand that you're still testing that as well. So you're not just testing your product, you're testing the marketing. And what works, what doesn't work, you might have to go back to the drawing board, but it's just part of the process. Don't get discouraged if you do. And then the third circle is offer product enhancement. You want to keep iterating, making your product better. After you launch, your product is not done. Just imagine the first version of Facebook after they launch versus what it is now. The best form of marketing, in my opinion, is creating a great product, something that people are that's worth talking about, and creates buzz in itself. So how do you actually market the app? I think the most important feature in marketing is creating internal marketing. So most people see marketing as just advertising, anything external, promotion, whatever, but you actually want to build marketing with inside your app. And this is called the viral loop. So how do you encourage people to share your app and talk about it? LinkedIn has that badge. Everyone wants to have a badge, like upgrade, whatever. It just creates kind of a buzz about it. There's share buttons, so if you've ever seen an app that says share to Facebook, share to Instagram, etc., that's another way to create a viral loop. There's just a bunch of unique things you can do with it. And then social media campaign, I underline campaign because social media, people have this misconception that all you have to do is just create content, market your app saying, download my app, it'll do this, whatever. But you want to create a very structured campaign. So on Monday you're doing this stuff, on Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday. And just have a very strategic understanding of where your consumers are looking, what they're doing on those certain days. So if they're more active between 6 and 9 p.m. on Wednesdays, you want to advertise between 6 and 9 p.m. on Wednesdays. So information is key, and create a campaign based on that. Guerrilla marketing, I wrote with 6 H's or whatever. I really don't like guerrilla marketing for apps. It might work for other things, but it's not very scalable. It's very expensive. I've never seen an app, like Twitter or Facebook, go out and hand out pamphlets. It just doesn't. It's not that effective, and it's not that efficient. And then ads on other apps. This tends to be a little bit expensive because you're paying Google and Facebook, or Google and Apple's CPM, which is cost per 1,000. So you have to pay X amount of dollars for every 1,000 users it goes to. So it's not free. It tends to be very expensive the more you advertise, but it tends to get a lot of clicks and a lot of buzz. So it is kind of effective. Then App Store optimization. This is what people miss out on and mess up the most. So people usually find apps through keyword searches. So they'll type games or social network or whatever, and you want to have certain tags, just like you would tagging a friend on Facebook, of certain keywords that are related to your app and are very popular. Apple and different consumer reports releases the top keywords in 2016, 2017, and you want to create those or add those to your app within the App Store or within Google Play, which is Google's version of the App Store, and that's really how you're going to create buzz. And the more people that download your app, the more people that see it, typically through keywords, the more likely Apple is to, or Google is to feature your app in the App Store. And that's where companies become unicorns and decacorns. They're in the top 10, top 15 in the App Store. One of mine got into top, I think, 80, and it was like featured on new apps we love on the App Store in some market. And we saw just like a ton of increase in users. And that's really what makes or breaks the app, because if an app's just sitting on the App Store, chances are it's not going to do too well. And then key point, test marketing as you would the actual product, like I said. The big misconception is all you have to do is just test the product, but marketing you're testing as well. Pretty much any activity is a test, and you should see everything as a barometer and learn from it. All right, so wrapping up, but this is something you'll see a lot, is the innovation adoption cycle. So basically you have the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggers. And this is usually the process of how your app becomes adopted. And the innovators tend to be very young, very hipster, they love trying new technologies. They're always on the App Store typing in keywords, typing in different apps. And these are the ones that you really want to target. So when you understand your target market and where their touch points are, start with the innovators and try to understand what exactly you're going to do for them, that will get them to communicate to the early adopters. And an example of this is Snapchat. My friend was definitely an innovator with Snapchat when it first came out. and I was an early adopter because I remember getting ready for a baseball game. He was sitting on bleachers and he was Snapchatting a friend saying, "This is the coolest thing ever." So how do you make innovators become the early adopters? If your product is great, it's usually through buzz marketing and word of mouth, but beware of that. I'll talk about that in a second. And this is what is called the chasm. So as soon as you go from the early adopters to the early majority, it's what's known as crossing the chasm, and that's where billion-dollar companies are made. As soon as you get into this 34%, because the late majority is usually more likely to follow the early majority than they would the innovators and the early adopters, and then you have the laggards. The laggards are, the Facebook grandmas that joined in 2017, whereas the innovators were the young 7th to 10th graders, and it just kept going, and then the laggards joined, and that's why Facebook has 2 billion users, and they're worth, like, what is it, Mr. Ray? You probably know Facebook. What's their valuation?
I'm not sure. Let me check this
Yeah,
out.
it's like-
I
it's
just
like-
bought it.
60 billion?
It's like 60 billion.
It's absurd, the PE ratio.
Yeah. That's because they've crossed the chasm within probably a year, I would say, which is insane.